Shah, not only a friend of the show, founder and CEO of CareYaya, we go to you for so many things, but this is a big one that you and I have talked about off camera. We're both sort of entering end or
Yes.
we're in this generation. Sorry, I have my GSP.
That's awesome.
This is what
Yeah.
happens when you don't studio.
Yeah.
We've talked about the sandwich generation. You and I are
Mhm.
in it. I'm very blessed to have both
Yeah.
my parents and my husband's parents still with us, and we're grateful
Yeah.
for that. But they're entering a different chapter, right? They're,
Yeah.
they're a little bit older. They're getting close to 80, and we're blessed to have a setup where we can support them if needed. But they're all independent. Not everybody is in this scenario, like you said. We just had
Yes.
holidays.
Yeah.
People haven't seen their parents for 6 months. They're going to their spouse and saying, my mom's really not doing well. I think we
Yeah.
need to move in.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me, Liz. And I think that this is a conversation happening across millions of living rooms. I think starting this Christmas and Thanksgiving are the number one and number two time periods in the year when this conversation starts. And it's usually somebody hasn't seen their older parents in a while and they realize, wow, they're losing functional independence, their start of cognitive decline that's becoming more and more. And what should we do? 60 million people are in this situation right now, kind of sandwiched between raising their kids, managing their own career, work responsibilities, and then suddenly trying to become caregivers for their parents. And I think it's very hard. It's very stressful for a lot of people. And I think what the number one thing most people are shocked by when they enter the situation is that there isn't much care support. Medicare doesn't cover any of this stuff.
Mhm.
So people are like, okay, I'm on my own. What do I do? I either I'm going to have to quit my career and do it myself, or I'm going to get outside help. Whether it's initially it starts with care workers in the home, or it becomes let's find a place for them to live where help is available. And I mean, these are very complicated, drawn out decisions. And also from the parents' perspective, the loss of independence. People don't want to give that up easily. So yeah, I'm happy to share a lot of tips and tactics that I've seen work well.
Marriage marriage can be stressful, right?
Hmm.
Marriage can be stressful in any chapter. And I read somewhere where when you have young toddlers, you think life is so complicated, but then you realize as they get older, you enter this generation of kids where you actually can't solve problems for them. You can't
Yeah,
fix their sippy cup top. So
yeah,
a lot of these sandwich generation parents are facing the fact that their kids are getting older. They can't solve their problems for them. They're 13, 14, 15. Their parents are in their 80s. And talk about discourse in a marriage. Wow.
yeah, yes,
Tough.
yeah. It's very tough. And I think there's a lot of like psychological and emotional shifts. Like just when your kid is getting older and becoming more and more independent, your parent is reversing, I hate to say it, and becoming more reliant on you. But because it's not kind of like easy for them to acknowledge that, the role is reversing where, like you said, your parents in their late 70s, you're slowly going to become their parents, and like you're going to be parenting your parent. And that's hard for both sides. It's hard for you to make that shift. Somebody who raised you, you're now telling them what to do and directing to care for them because they can't do it themselves. And they are going to be like, why are you telling me what to do? I raised you, like I can do it on my own. But sometimes they don't acknowledge and admit that, okay, they're having cognitive challenges or they're having physical challenges. So I think that itself is hard. But then when you start putting yourself in that role, they move in with you or you're spending a lot of time caring, it can put a lot of strain on relationships and marriage. And I think that partly it's just I think the sandwich generation, especially like the sandwich generation woman traditionally has had a lot of the stress. Nowadays the man is also experiencing stress just because of the way our society is. And a generation or so ago people had less kids. So I think now a lot of males find themselves, interesting statistic I found is 42% of people in this country that are caring for aging parents are actually male, which is like compared to 30, 40 years ago, it would have been disproportionately 80% plus would have been female. And it's because a lot of times that's the only child or that's the kid that's living closest to the parents. So I think it's actually reshaping a lot of family dynamics. I think long term for the better, because everybody, should have experience in doing care. But I think in the near term, it's creating a lot of hiccups and challenges because people are suddenly put in this situation like, I don't know what to do.
Are you seeing that also because the traditional marital roles are shifting as well?
Yeah.
As a kid of the 80s and 90s, being a stay-at-home dad was unusual. I really
Yeah.
wouldn't say it's that unusual now.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
still would say where I live, it's a minority.
Yeah.
I know a number of stay-at-home dads, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that part of it?
I think that's part of it. I think there's that part of it is that. I think part of it is and I had like a viral post about this of like this guy taking care of his mother, and it's because 40, 50 years ago that might have been his sister doing it, but he doesn't have a sister now. In terms of like a lot of people had fewer and fewer kids, so the burden fell. And then as they enter and the male does caregiving for mom or dad, they realize like, oh wow, this is a challenge. So I think one, it's just people had fewer kids, and a lot of people I talk to in the care economy, especially older people, are like, oh, I was one of seven, I was one of five, I was one of nine. Even in my own family, it's like that. Like within two generations, I'm one of two, but the generation prior to me was like one of four or five. The generation prior to them was one of seven or nine. So it's like, well, think about it. Like when care comes on you, it's either going to be me or my sister doing it based on who's living nearby to the parents. In my wife's case, she's one of one. She was the only child. And like literally, if you go back two generations in her family, large families. So I think as a result of that, a lot of the care work is on you. So I think that's a big shift that oftentimes middle-aged people who are, let's say at an extreme, only children are going to be caring for both of their parents. Sometimes, obviously, also there's divorce. So you might have four parents. And then what happens with your spouse's parents? So I think that a lot of people are being put in this situation. One interesting thing as a society, I think a lot of people don't realize is, do you know by 2030, we're going to have more people in this country above 65 than below 18? First time in history.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you too, is that we're talking about, you keep on mentioning the declining birth rates, and we've covered that
Yeah.
extensively.
Yeah.
There are simply more people
Yes.
who are older.
Yes. Yeah. So I like to do a visual of this. This is the way the population, I don't know if you can see it, but the population used to be like a pyramid, right? Like you had tons of young people, fewer middle-aged people, and then very few people at the top. Okay, the things that have changed in the last 50 years is thanks to advances in healthcare and medical technology, a lot of people at the top, like who were like passing away, are now able to live longer, right? Question if they're able to live healthier and independently, that's a separate question, but they're living physically longer. So the top of the pyramid is going like this. At the same time, you have fewer births, right? Like people are giving less and less births. So the pyramid is turning into this. Well, before we had a huge base of people and a bunch of middle-aged people to take care of all these older, it was fine. Now you don't have that. And another really interesting statistic on that is for decades, for every older person in this country, we had 7 middle-aged people in this country who would theoretically take care of them, right? So 7-to-1, what they call a caregiver support ratio. It's literally, if you line it out since 1920 or 1930, it's around 7-to-1. This decade, between 2025 and 2035, it collapses to 3-to-1. And it's a couple of reasons. One, because the aging population of baby boomers is hitting their older years, and that is a large population cohort. And what a lot of people forget is after the baby boom, there was a baby bust. Like if you think about 1945, post World War II up until about like 1960s, I don't know where they define it, there's a boom in children. Right after that, you had a lot of stuff like social movements, hippie movement, things like that. You had rise of birth control, et cetera. So then you had a massive baby bust where there were not that many people born in this country from about 1965 until whatever, 1990. There was a huge drop. So not only is the baby boom population aging and getting to the point where they need care, behind them, there are not that many middle-aged people. So 7-to-1 going to 3-to-1, I think is going to restructure the entire society. And I'm surprised people aren't talking about this all the time. And then of course, the fact that there's not that many kids being born, I think that's a different story. But I think just the simple baby boom and baby bust and who takes care of the boomers is a big question. And then beyond that, I think the other thing is, a lot of people talk about the difference between health span and lifespan. Like a lot of people are physically living until 80, 82, 85, 88, but they're not fully there in terms of cognitively. Since 75 or 78, they might be living with dementia. So the body lives on, and due to advances in technology, we can keep them alive. But that last 5 to 10 years, sometimes even longer, they are not able to be functionally independent, and somebody needs to take care of them. Otherwise, they're a danger to themselves. And I think that is going to be one of the biggest challenges in our society. Who's going to do that? Is it going to be the adult children? Is it going to be care workers? Are they going to be put in a facility? And I think that we're heading into this, in my opinion, a big crisis when the first of the baby boomers are hitting 80 this year, right? 1946, if you add 80 is 2026. 80 is typically when your dementia probability jumps suddenly from like 10 to 20%, it jumps to like 33% if you're able to live long enough. And then if you live at 85, it's even higher. So we're going to have this huge wave of like dementia, cognitive decline, physical frailty in the baby boomer population at a time when there's already a massive shortage of care workers. Like most people know, whether it's childcare or elder care, in most markets, you can't find it. It's more and more expensive. There's fewer and fewer people doing it. Who's going to take care of all these people? And I think that it's going to be a big population crisis. A lot of middle-aged people are going to have to do it themselves. Can you imagine the employer impact? A lot of people are going to quit their jobs and say, I can't afford this. I'll just do it myself. Then if you quit your job and you're 48 and you take care of mom or dad for 3 or 4 years, good luck getting a job again. So I think that this is something important for government to think about. This is something really important for a lot of large employers to think about. I think supporting middle-aged people who are in kind of the thick of it to get care for aging parents is both, I think, a societal responsibility, a business responsibility, and I think something that we owe it to our older population. So I think it requires a reimagining of how our country delivers care.
I mean, my mind is blown because we've spent so much energy talking about, universal pre-K. Look at what New Mexico is doing. Look at what New York is doing. They're talking. So that way, these folks, these women like me who are maybe they had kids in their late 30s and they're 40 years old and they want to stay in the workforce. So they're trying to support this population. But that same population, just like you said, have these parents who are approaching 80. And you don't hear this policy discussion at all.
At all. Yeah. I think at all, because I think most of the time the people are in the thick of it. So my wife's in this situation right now where she's taking care of her mom, who's moved close to us and may even move in with us, who has like metastatic cancer, but has a multi-year prognosis left and is in her late 70s. And my wife and I both work and we have 2 young children and we're in our early 40s. So it's like, like this is going to be a societal challenge for a lot of us. And I think it's so under discussed in policy. Another actually interesting thing that I think is under discussed is, forget even just the doing of the care yourself. The cost of getting care help is astronomical. Like to put your mom or dad, I did a recent post about this and it went viral and it was kind of interesting. I said, getting 1 year of memory care for your mother is like buying a Porsche 911 every year. It's a little bit of hyperbole, but it's true. And I live in North Carolina, so cost of care here is affordable compared to big cities like Washington, D.C., New York, LA. But in most markets, if your mom or dad has dementia, in a memory care facility, it would cost you about $120,000 to $150,000 a year, sometimes $200,000 a year. You're literally buying a new Porsche every year. So I put that out there. A lot of people responded and were like, oh, you're so off. And I thought they were going to say it's cheaper. And they were like, no, the place where my mom was at, I could have bought 2 Porsches a year, and it's like, can you imagine? And this might be a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year thing. So the cost of care is astronomical. The cost of care to get a home care worker in your home so that you can do your job, just 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, average cost around the country, $80,000 a year now. Like this, so anyone whose income is less than 120 or 130, because this is post-tax dollars, right? So you have to make 130, pay taxes, come up with the 80, and then pay the worker or pay the agency. Like anyone who's like, okay, I make 90K, it's like, I'm going to lose money doing my job, paying the taxes, then paying the care company. Why don't I just do it myself? So I think this is going to be a massive like workforce issue.
And you're talking about a generation in theory where when you're in your 40s and 50s, you still got it, right? These are your income accelerated years,
Agreed. Prime of your career.
Yeah, your kids are in public school, so maybe you can afford those 8 hours a day and maybe an after school program that's subsidized or low cost.
Yeah.
You have the ability to bust out some hours and now it's just going down the drain.
Yep.
So what do you think lawmakers they don't have the ability to focus on it, or they're being pushed because maybe pre-K, universal child care coverage is sexier, or they just have way too much on their plate, or the crisis isn't here yet?
I think the crisis isn't here yet, but it's bubbling right beneath the surface. So childcare, I think the movement has had 30 years to develop. Like in the 1990s, I feel like when I was growing up and younger, there was a big movement of, hey, employers need to realize women in the workforce need support. And if you don't think about childcare policy, how are we going to, have children, and how are we going to support women working? So I think employers started shifting. Government obviously started shifting slowly. And I think you've had 20, 30 years of momentum. And now it's been accelerated because during COVID, the cost of childcare and availability of childcare got so difficult that everybody pushed and complained. I feel like in elder care, we're not there yet. We're getting there. But most of the people dealing with it are so drowning in the midst of it that they don't have time to lobby. There's not like a lobbying organization that's sitting there hitting up DC that's all the 45-year-olds in America who are caregiving for mom and dad. They don't have time to lobby. Like they're busy with their own career and their own children and now caring for parents. But I believe that's going to become an issue. I had actually thought the politicians would seize the opportunity because it's a bipartisan issue, by the way. Like tons of surveys have come out. Johns Hopkins did a big survey on this, that Republican or Democrat or independent, how much do you support government doing more to support older adults and kids taking care of aging parents? And it was like 80 something percent on both sides. So it's like across the aisle. I think it's a big issue. So I think it's a huge opportunity every politician should capitalize on. Everybody has parents or everybody is older, is going through the care needs themselves. I think part of the reason why it hasn't been focused on is historically Medicare has stayed away. And this is part of one of my theories on this, and even why I'm building CareYaya. Medicare has shied away from funding this care at home. So let's say if your mom has dementia, right? There's a drug that has moderate efficacy, like 17, 18%. It could, delay kind of the worsening of dementia. So not majority efficacy. $32,000 a year, Medicare will pay for that. But your mom has dementia, and for a fact getting a care worker in the home will help you do your job and will reduce the risk of your mom ending up in the ER or having a fall. $0. They don't pay anything. So you're on your own. So why? So I think this is also a business community innovation problem. They don't pay because the way care is delivered in this country is the majority of the care is run through these home care agencies, which charge you $40 an hour.
Yep.
They pay $15 an hour to the care worker. It's all upcharge, sales, marketing, franchise fees, royalties, and all that. So Medicare is like, why the hell would I waste $40 an hour and then the care worker is getting less than half? So I'm just like blowing all this money, and I have to cut city by city, state by state deals because there isn't like national care platform. There's just franchisors who are running franchisees in all these different cities. So Medicare would have to go cut 100 or 200 different deals. So they're just like, I don't want to deal with this. And then the care companies decided there is no payer strategy. So they all said, I'm just going to cater to the upper echelon, the top 1%, the top 5%, who can afford this out of pocket, and everyone else is on their own. So actually, one of my hypotheses is that if you build something that the government can responsibly say, hey, this is a good allocation of funding, it's affordable, it's actually helping all these people in a convenient way. That's kind of what we're trying to build at CareYaya, is that if you can deliver a large workforce that is vetted, reliable, motivated, and can do a good job, and you can deliver it at around $20 an hour, where the care worker is getting paid well, there's not a lot of markup going out the door, Medicare will be like, you know what, I can cut a national deal here and try it out. So we're actually actively in talks with the Center for Medicare Innovation about this kind of pilot. But I suspect that over the next few years, you're going to see a wave of innovation. This industry has not innovated since the 1980s. And I think personally think it's a disgrace because we have an aging population. We have all these middle-aged people who are going to demand better solutions.
And then you present this solution and you think to yourself, well, that just makes too much sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be standing in your way with that pilot?
Lobbying. I mean, my God, the lobbying power of the home care agencies industry is enormous.
Is it really? Because
it's an enormous. Because think about how much money is being made. Like if you're underpaying the care workers and you're charging this much to the families, I mean, it's like a cash cow. It's an extremely profitable business to be in.
I wouldn't say it's like a sexy job to be a caretaker. They're not exactly making it appealing from what the
Well, so on that, I also have a theory on that. So, right now there's a lot of headlines about how there's a 1 million plus care worker shortage. It's not a sexy job because it doesn't pay, but the person paying is paying a lot. So interestingly, if you study, kind of think about it from a market standpoint, most markets in America, like if you want to buy a car, if you want to buy a house, whatever, most markets are operating in kind of like a formal economy, right? That's like above board. And you go to a dealership, or you process something formally if you're buying a car, or you buy a house with a realtor or whatever. In the care market, it's one of the few markets in the country where 2/3 of the market operates in the black market or the gray market. As in, only like out of 500 billion of home-based care that's happening, only 1/3 is happening through care companies. You hire an agency and they get a caregiver. 2/3 is happening. Somebody puts up a flyer at church and they find a nice person and say, hey, I'll pay you $20 an hour under the table. Somebody asks their neighbor and their neighbor says, oh, I know so-and-so, they'll do the care. So when you have a market that's $500 billion and 2/3 is happening in the shadows, to me, that would send you a signal that this market is broken. People demand better solutions, but the solutions that the companies have created, most people find frustrating. And it's because of that most of the money is going to the company, the care worker is getting nothing. And I've been in this, by the way, in taking care of my grandfather. Like, we hired so many care agencies and different ways to get care workers. And it was just like we were paying an arm and a leg. And the care was so bad because the worker was getting paid nothing. Ultimately, we felt so guilty that my mom ended up just quitting her career and doing it herself. And it lasted several years, to the point where my mom has not returned to the workforce since, because at that point she was in her mid 50s. And I think that this is a second order problem, that if you don't get good care help, many family members feel guilty. You're like, okay, this is my parents. This is who I'm going to leave them with. So I think that's a big problem, that the cost of care is too high, but the quality of care is low because the worker is getting less than half of what you're paying. So the experience sucks. And I think that is a big opportunity for redesign.
Yeah, and we explored that. As I mentioned, we explored at home care with my mom, and you're right. It was like a $2,000 book. It was very structured. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. I could see where it was all going, but
Yeah.
you had a booking fee. You had a minimum hours. You
Yep.
had very strict hours, and we did end up, like you said,
Yeah.
just asking around and getting some freelance help. So
Yep.
what would you say to the consumer at that? If someone like me were to go to you and say, "Hey, Neil, what did you do in this scenario?" Would you say, "Hey, I would go on care.com and try to find a freelance, whether it be a college kid, a nursing
Yeah.
student?"
Well, yeah, a great question. I would actually go to CareYaya, which is what we're building. You'd go to careYaya.org, and what we've operationalized now successfully at scale. If I remember, you're in the Atlanta metro area, right? So, okay, if you're looking for care in Atlanta, it's about $40 an hour through a local care agency. And the care workers, no offense, are not going to be the best and brightest because they don't get paid that well. And if anyone could get a job at Walmart or McDonald's, they would do that. So you'd pay $40 an hour and get this mixed quality care and literally be spending 80 grand a year. Or you can go to careYaya.org, and we are running this maximum impact program around the country. You can get an Emory pre-medical student, Emory nursing student, Georgia State, like some young, wonderful person that's going to one day become a doctor, nurse, clinician at $20 an hour. And they're getting all the money. So it's actually 30 to 50% more affordable than any other kind of like care option. But it's also extremely high quality. If like these are vetted, motivated future healthcare workers in the country. We've now operationalized that with 50,000 students around the country. So in places like Washington, D.C., we have tons of students at Georgetown, George Washington, places like Boston, where the cost of care is $45 an hour. You can spend 45 through an agency and get some random person, or you can spend $20 an hour and get a Harvard pre-med student taking care of your mom or dad. I mean, it's like night and day. And by the way, these students are like wonderful. They want to do the work. Many of them don't even care about the money. They just want the experience and the hours. So I think it's like really awesome. So I do believe like right now the care industry is like really on the back foot, and they're complaining about immigration and shortages of workers. And I'm like, look, there is a domestic workforce that will do this work. But you just have to think about redesigning the payment model. So I think that the shortages and the quality of the care can be fixed if you find ways to pay the care worker more and a way for the companies to charge less. And I think it requires a scale effort, to build like national platform. I believe there's other hidden workforces too. I think there are stay-at-home moms who want to return to the workforce. Many of them would do kind of part-time or freelance flexible care. I've seen some of them do wonderful jobs. There are early retirees. There's so many people who retire in their early to mid 60s, and they're like, I don't want to do a full-time job, but I will do, a shift here and there helping someone. So I think that the care industry has not really focused on tapping domestic workforce. And I think that this is a major opportunity over the next few years.
So the immigration argument, where someone comes to you and says, "Neil, that this industry will suffer because there is just a lot of controversy, right, like
Hmm.
a lot of
Hmm.
controversy right now around
Yeah.
immigration, and there's a workforce that some are arguing is exiting the country," and you would
Yeah.
say, "No, I don't think that's accurate. This is what I'm hearing, so correct me." You would
Hmm.
say, "No, I don't think that's accurate. I think that we're not tapping into what's available."
Yeah, I think I'd say yes. And in terms of, I personally think the challenge is solvable. Like, I think immigration has been a crutch. In my personal opinion, the care industry, in order to downward pressure wages, has over relied on immigrant labor and then saying, hey, I can get away with paying this person $15 an hour to do what is very difficult, emotionally and physically taxing work. And I'm going to charge the family 40. Like, so when more and more Americans don't sign up for the job, the care industry doesn't figure out how do I run it better. They figure out, oh, let me get more immigrants in because they'll do it. So I think that there is a knock on the care industry, and that is like, look, we can find tons of domestic people who want to do this work. We had to figure out ways to pay them better and figure out a way to operationalize it and reduce the cost side. But So I think yes, and in terms of like, I do believe there are so many people domestically, and think about also the impact of AI. Like, there's a lot of job loss going on right now.
Yeah.
Care is the future. Like, there's a growing need. A lot of people are willing to do it. If you figure out ways to pay them better, and you figure out a way to kind of match families more affordably, you can find a bunch of people to do this work. So I don't want people to over rely on, let's just loosen immigration just so we can kind of like excuse the industry's sloppiness and lack of innovation. All that said, I actually do think there's probably yes, and in terms of, I think there's a proper pathway to maybe create caregiver specific visas and say, hey, look, we have a huge aging population. We don't have enough people in this country potentially to take care of them, because 5 years from now, the caregiver shortage might be even worse.
Yeah.
And if we need on a selective basis, why don't we do skills based immigration where we find people who are nice and kind and who want to do this work, who are good at this work, and say, okay, we'll allow you in this country under a caregiver visa to help this older person who needs help. I think that is a viable policy. I've actually heard that being debated around in a bipartisan manner in DC. So I would say I'm open to that. But I think if we had continued to have a more restrictive immigration policy, I think there are ways to innovate and get domestic workforce to do this work.
You talk a little bit about AI, and it could be just my social media feed at night when it's mostly food, dogs, and then artificial intelligence and anything related to raising kids or maybe sourdough. But I also see, robots doing dishes or robots
Hmm. Hmm.
organizing my laundry. And I don't know if it's real, but, is there a space for that? Are we going to start to see this emerging technology and
Yeah.
robotics come into play, especially when it comes to caretaking?
1000%. 1000%. So we do a lot of hobby projects just within that because we are kind of like trying to help address unmet needs. So we ended up winning a big grant from the National Institute on Aging for this robot we built, which is a basic social companion robot. We call it YayaBear. And it's just like a teddy bear companion that talks to older adults and gets their life story. So we embodied voice AI into a physical form factor robot. And the thing just blew up. It's sold out. We're now scrambling to like make more of them. But what we learned is a lot of older adults, whether they're living at home or they're in assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care units, they don't have a lot of one-on-one time. And at these facilities, by the way, they're so short-staffed, right? So, but people want interactions. So right now, the robots are not advanced enough from a mechanical engineering standpoint to do a lot of the complicated tasks, like helping lift someone out of bed, helping somebody kind of walk to the bathroom safely without falling. I think it's a little too risky to have the robots do that. But right now, the robots are able to provide kind of social elements of like voice AI, interactive conversations, a little bit of safety, medication reminders, things like that. So we have launched one. We study the market in Japan and China, and it's far ahead. There's even much more assistive robots in Japan right now, and they're not releasing those in the American market. But if I had to project out by 2030, yes, I believe in the next 5 years plus, there will be humanoid robots doing some of this basic work around the house, helping older people just because there simply are not enough people. The challenge will be cost. Is this going to be a humanoid robot that costs $50,000?
Yeah.
Or are companies going to innovate and figure out a way to get this to $10,000 to $5,000? I actually think. Did you know that working in the care industry is the third most dangerous job in America,
I did not.
based on the yeah, based on the believe it or not, I would have thought it'd be like climbing the telephone pole and doing stuff like that. This beats that, by the way. If you and you look at BLS data and you look at data on workplace injuries and how many out days people have to do because of a workplace event, it's working in assisted living facilities is the third most dangerous job in America. Why? Because you're sometimes lifting people. Sometimes the people are heavy. Sometimes the people fall. Sometimes you break something because you lifted it improperly. Sometimes you have a back injury. So this is something that is perfect for a robot to handle the physicality of care. And I think that that is going to be a big, big innovation. Things like, helping you with eating food, meal preparation, feeding. I think a lot of people don't have that help. And, you look at any of these assisted living facilities, you have one attendant helping 8 to 10 residents, and they're just going literally room to room, bathing, toileting, helping with basic eating, and then next one, next one, next one. So it's like robots could really help with a lot of those kind of like non-relationship, just like tasks of care. I think they could. Is it, it's in a way it's dystopian. Like it kind of feels sad, about that. Like I don't think that's a future that is thrilling. But the alternate future where you just don't have enough people to take care of them is even more sad because a lot of these people are going to be by themselves. So robots better than nothing. That's my personal opinion.
And I have two takeaways from that. First of all, lifting dead body weight because I have experienced an
Yeah.
older adult falling. It's
Hmm.
not like lifting a toddler or even my daughter
Hmm.
who is
Hmm.
110 pounds, so she can
Yeah.
wrap her neck around me or whatever it be.
Yeah.
It is actually appalling, and from
Yeah.
someone who exercises, you do,
Yeah.
I do, we lift
Yeah.
weights, and I think
It's
if we
still, yeah.
helped someone who has
Yeah.
fallen, it's actually
Yeah.
shocking.
Yeah.
The second point I heard you say is that if AI could enter the home, and
Hmm.
yes, of course, assisted living, but is the goal also to keep some of these folks in the older generation at home because statistically they simply live longer at home?
Great question. Great. I'm so glad you asked that question. And I appreciate that there's an assisted living industry. So I don't want to like bash anyone, and people have to make difficult decisions in their families. But I personally would try to keep mom or dad at home as long as possible. Duke study came out last year. Adjusted for everything, race, income, age, whatever, you move somebody into a facility, 3 years shorter life expectancy, adjusted for literally health condition and everything, right? So it is statistically a fact that there's something about that, the loss of independence, the lack of one-on-one, whatever, the lack of familiar surrounding that accelerates somebody's passing. So I think it is absolutely critical to keep people at home. CareYaya's entire mission is by operationalizing a domestic workforce, doing it very affordably, low cost, by adding ancillary tech innovations, we think everyone can age at home longer and longer. We're not there yet, but that's the world we want to build. And I think that facilities, would be less and less used. But most middle-aged people find themselves in this uncomfortable situation where they're like, I cannot keep mom or dad safely at home. Even if the cost of care is affordable, they're worried about them falling. They're worried about how am I going to monitor them when I'm at work? Do I need somebody around them 24/7 night? That's a big challenge. Like even if I have a caregiver during the day, who's around them at night? Because a lot of times people just get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and they fall there and you end up in the ER. So that's kind of like these are challenges that technology can really help solve. And I think that's one of the hidden things that people aren't, thinking about is that a lot of assistive tech, the big benefit is keeping them safe at home. And I think that we are rapidly moving on that. The people have developed Wi-Fi sensors that literally you plug into the wall. It's minimally non-invasive and it gives you alert, when somebody's getting out of bed and just like beeps so that the person gets alert that, hey, I wake up fast. Because that's like the highest risk is the blood pressure change when you get out of bed in the middle of the night and you just fall right when you're getting out. So I think there's a lot of cool innovation that's coming down the pipe that I'm very excited about. But I think the future would be the benefits of an assisted living or kind of memory care unit is that, right, that you are at a place where they can monitor you. I think if you can bring in some of that technology in the home and then you have like a good workforce solution, I think more and more people will be able to stay at home. And back to my prior point, these places aren't cheap. You're spending a Porsche every year to keep your mom or dad there, and that's all coming out of pocket. So you
Well, and
know
before we started recording for our guests, our producer Christine was on here, and we talked about how it really can put a strain on marriage. But if you
Mhm.
have all of this technology to alleviate the pressure of that spouse whose parent is moving in, maybe
Yeah,
we would see more of these grandparents moving back into the home.
agreed.
You mentioned other countries that are also working on AI and innovations. I heard you mention Japan and I think it was China.
Yeah.
How does America, the United States, how do we do end of life care? Do we do it well? Do we do it poorly? And what countries are doing it better?
I think we don't do it well. My personal opinion, we don't do it well at all.
Right.
And why? One statistic: when you survey older adults and even middle-aged people of how do you want to die, over 80% of them say, "In my home, surrounded by family." When you observe the people that died last year, how did they die? Less than 20% of them. Most of them died in bright fluorescent lights at the hospital on a bunch of machinery. And I think that is a freaking tragedy. So we don't do end of life care well. It depends on what you define as well. I believe in more of like a spiritual and like psychosocial definition of well. Medically, do we do it well? Yes. Like we throw everything we got at it, but I don't think that's how most people want to go out. And I think that delivering care in line with people's goals has been a big failure, of our society because we've over medicalized the experience of dying and what happens in the 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months before dying. And I think we've underappreciated kind of the spiritual and the psychosocial aspect of dying. And as a result, most people are not dying according to wishes. We've done a lot of research projects on this too, of like goals of care conversations. And, you see people, let's say people with terminal cancer that are older. and you talk to them about, hey, you have metastatic cancer, you have a year left to live, whatever, and you survey, okay, how would you want to go out, and then you see what actually follow up and see what happened. And yeah, like I said, most of them end up kind of going on in a facility setting, and that's not what they want. So I don't think we're doing it well. And I think part of it is like the healthcare system. The healthcare system over prioritizes purely extension of life, under prioritizes the person's goals and wishes, under prioritizes at what point do we stop aggressive treatment and just kind of like let somebody go peacefully? At what point do we not put somebody on a ventilator and kind of do the cost benefit calculus? And I think partly they do it because of liability, that, okay, if we don't know, this is a big gap. It's actually a project that we're working on just as a hobby project on the side. There's a big gap in the electronic health record of like, if they don't know and that person didn't fully articulate it and didn't go into the HR or create a legal document, by default, they have to do everything. Even if their son or daughter says, mom didn't want that, they're like, well, I could get sued if I don't do this, so therefore I will. So one of our big initiatives is we are trying to empower more and more people to have these goals of care conversations and get them in the medical record. So I think that's kind of a big way we can fix it. But no, I think we don't do it well because most people go out not how they want to go out. And I think that's a tragedy.
Is it also our culture and society? And of course, I mean, like I mentioned, I have older grandparents. We haven't entered necessarily the end of life where
Yeah.
we are facilitating that,
Yeah.
but I can somehow create an analogy, and you can too. When
Yeah.
we gave birth to children, it was,
Yeah.
you're such a brave mom. You're doing it all on your own.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
really how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be in this community
Yeah.
where we all sort of fill the gaps for each other. But now, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, as our parents are getting older, it's, I'm like driving around thinking to myself, well, would one of my parents go in here if they needed to? It wasn't, would
Yeah.
I create space for them in my home? It's almost like it would be
Yeah.
more socially acceptable for me to find a place for mom. But that's
Yeah.
twisted, right?
Yeah. No, no, I think so. I think so. I think that we have underappreciated, and you see the rise of what they call multi-generational households. Have you noticed like that's rising now? I actually think that's my personal opinion. I think it's kind of a cooler way to live if you can pull it off. Not just because the older person gets more support, but I actually think the middle-aged person and even the younger kids benefit from that. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents when I was growing up, and oftentimes my grandparents were the childcare in terms of when my parents worked. I thought that was like an awesome way to grow up, and I think it had benefits for all generations. Like for me to learn a lot of like wisdom and insights when my parents would be busy, middle-aged and working, and for them to have a lot of interaction and kind of keep up their own energy level, like chasing, kids around. So I think that way of life we might return to, but I do think we need to kind of like redesign it for the modern era, where a lot of people need to work and figure out ways to provide support. But tons of studies have shown that taking older people and then grouping them together, whether it's, in our area, there's a lot of these like senior living independent complexes that have gone up, whether they're apartments or condos. Okay, that's cool. But if you have a bunch of 75-year-olds and that's the entire neighborhood, there's something missing. Where's the 40-year-old that lives next to him with the 2-year-old kids? Where is the 50-year-old? Where is the teenagers? Like, I think that there's something natural about a community. You live in a neighborhood and you have people of all types, you have people of all generations, and you're kind of interacting, as opposed to a, kind of homogenous place where it's all 75 and 80-year-olds. They don't even want that, I think. So I think that style of living is changing. But I think, yeah, whether you live with your own family, I've even seen some programs where some older people are renting out a place in their house and a younger person, is moving in who may have difficulty otherwise affording their own place or rent. I think any of that kind of stuff is a home run, and not just a home run for the older person. It's a home run for the younger generation too. Just like interacting with people outside of your generation, I think is helpful for all.
I mean, just hearing you, I mean, I'd love a baby boomer on my street yelling at all the teens who would
Yeah.
race up and down in
Yeah.
their scooters without helmets.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I want to yell at them,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking to myself, I want to be the cool mom. Like, I
Yeah.
would love
Yeah.
that 80-year-old grandpa saying, slow down.
Yeah.
You don't want to
Yeah.
be a nerdy mom. So moving forward, I want to sort of wrap it up and ask
Sure.
you, what you think the future holds. Because at one point during our conversation, it felt sort of grim
Yeah.
that policies and lawmakers weren't drawing attention to it. And then I felt a little bit positive when you talked about, your organization and
Yeah.
the college kids and
Yeah.
AI. So kind of blue sky it for me as we move forward. Because
Yeah.
as you mentioned, 2030, 2035, 2036, we're going to be hitting these new milestones,
Yeah.
especially the birth rate. I mean, to hear that there's going to be more respectfully, an
Yeah.
older generation than
Yeah.
younger. It's just, it's not balanced.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm generally a very optimistic person, so I would say, but optimism has to be, you have to work towards a better future you want to see. So I think that currently it looks grim, but I also think it's darkest before dawn, where suddenly everybody's going to realize, hey, there's a challenge and the societal crisis. Why I'm optimistic is this. Okay, I've been working in caregiving and aging field for the last whatever, decade. In the last year, I've seen more momentum than the entire time. Bradley Cooper did a massive movie on caregiving for his dad, and it was on PBS and it went viral. It's a documentary about caregiving. Taylor Swift came out and did this whole thing about caring for her own dad. I believe a couple other people like Liam Hemsworth, a couple others have come out with their own things on caregiving for aging parents. It's now just bubbling up in the cusp. Jay Leno is going very public, taking care of his wife with dementia. Bruce Willis, obviously. You have had more celebrity activism and focus on this issue, in my opinion, in the last year than you had in the last 20 years combined. So suddenly it's becoming big. A senator gave his maiden speech in Senate, Senator Andy Kim from New Jersey, entirely about caregiving for his dad and just like how difficult it is, how there's a challenge that hits middle-aged families, etc. So I kind of feel like we're just at that societal cusp where the crisis is obvious. People are going to be paying more and more attention to it. And at some point that tips into opportunity where people are like, okay, there's opportunity for better policy. There's opportunity for more innovation. There's opportunity for people to just put their heads together and figure it out. So I actually think that, yeah, I think the future is very bright. I think technology is improving. I think there's workforce development projects. I think that there's a huge opportunity to redesign aging generally. And I think most importantly, a lot of the baby boomers now that are entering that age where they need care, they put mom and dad in these places and they're like, I want something better for my own future. So I think they're also going to kind of drive the change. So yeah, I think by 2030, I'm very optimistic about workforce. I think that cost of care is not going to remain this high. I think it's high enough that's going to break and then people are going to innovate very fast. I think Medicare is going to start moving towards helping people with this because it's good for the bottom line. Like I think so many studies have come out that if you get somebody care in the home, there's fewer hospitalizations, there are fewer ER visits. Think about one ER visit bills Medicare $7,500. So it's like if you can just like get a caregiver there for $20 an hour, how many hours can you get the care and save one ER visit? You're actually better off financially from a Medicare perspective. I think that the working population, the middle-aged people, and the workforce challenge, I think a lot of employers are going to start saying, hey, I need to think about how do I support my best workers that have had 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience. I don't want them dropping out because they got to care for mom and dad. I want them, staying engaged. So I think that's going to be a big opportunity. So I think policy is going to change and I think innovation, but I think technology is going to help a lot and it's going to help people kind of stay at home. And I think that's awesome for everyone.
And also, and I could be wrong on this one, but the attention to food, to
Hmm.
this whole generation maybe that is suffering from dementia, and
Yeah.
a lot of it could have been diet that we
Hmm.
now know just had these huge insulin spikes. So there's
It's called type 3 diabetes. A lot of researchers are saying that, it's like blood sugar levels are very correlated with dementia.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that could be a big improvement. Like you
Yeah.
can't necessarily, in some cases, I've actually read that you can reverse some of the symptoms
Hmm.
with
Yeah.
dietary changes and exercise.
Yeah.
So there's a big push to do it holistically too.
Hmm.
Um, on that note, would you end it and say that's also part of it? The improvement that what we're putting into our bodies not only impacts young people, but as a sandwich generation, it also impacts our parents who grew
Yeah.
up with this influx of TV dinners
Yeah.
and low fat, high sugar, high carbohydrate diets that may have wreaked havoc on their brains.
1,000. I've seen it myself. I've seen it myself of people with not extremely advanced dementia, but people with like pretty obvious and, kind of moderate dementia significantly reversed through complete changes in lifestyle. So yeah, I think 100%. I think that's underappreciated and it's kind of like it's a topic where a lot of people don't talk about, openly, but a lot of families who go into a panic mode and switch everything are seeing notable results. So I think there should be tons of research funding into things like this instead of just drugs, So yeah, I think that that's a big impact too. And then I think if you solve that, if people like live out to their life expectancy without this 10-year period where they can't take care of themselves, then I think it's better for them, but it's also better for society in terms of you're not spending an enormous amount of resources taking care of someone who can't take care of themselves. So I think dementia is a big public health challenge and a big opportunity that can be redesigned through diet and lifestyle.
Okay, well, before we let you go, tell us a little bit more about CareYaya, where we can find some of these resources that you're providing.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I think first, obviously, just anyone can come to our site, www.careYaya.org, CareYaya.org. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm, pretty active, and I respond to or try to respond to all the messages. So most of the resources on the site, and then we also are happy to share resources around. We have like laundry lists of ideas around different tech tools you can use in the house for safety monitoring. We do a lot of collaborations with like the AARP and other organizations that have like entire portfolio of these. Some of these we're building ourselves, but other ones we're kind of like we're aware of. And then we're also part of like the National Institute on Aging, where they are funding a lot of innovation. I totally forgot to mention that, but by the way, like government is really ahead of this in the sense of what they're funding. National Institute of Aging is funding a lot of the coolest innovations in aging in the country that I think it doesn't get a lot of publicity. But I think they're doing it because the private venture capital industry has not, jumped into that. So I actually think that's another big opportunity as some of these projects prove out. I think VCs are going to start realizing, hey, there's a huge opportunity in aging innovation. So yeah, but reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to chat with people.
Goodbye med spas. All right, VCs, you hear that? We need to enter this different. All right. They
Yeah,
came for the 40-year-old women when they wanted our faces, and now we're saying, hey,
yeah,
wait a second, you got to help me with my mom. So
I know.
that can leave us with the big T's. Neil Shah,
Yeah.
you are such a gem, and we are grateful for your wealth of knowledge. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, Liz, thanks so much for the opportunity. This was really fun. Happy to do it again anytime.
Maria Portela, we are so grateful that you're here because you're one of approximately 60 million Americans who are in this pickle, in this sandwich generation where you have to be the caregiver for your parents. It's something that you never envisioned. So, just tell me a little bit of your story, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mom passed at the end of last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, end of right before Thanksgiving, November 26th, her 94 and a half birthday. Thank
Okay, well, very sensitive to your, especially around the holidays. I bet that was really, really heavy.
thank you.
But you and of course, you miss her dearly, but I would imagine that you also had the struggle of taking care of her. Can you just walk me through some of the challenges that you faced?
Yes, in I am one of four girls. My one of my sisters, the sisters that was just almost 4 years older than I, passed away in 2004. So as my parents aged, the responsibility for caring for them fell on my older sister, Gloria. She's 5 years older than I am, myself, and my younger sister, Christy. She's 2 years younger than I am. Gloria and Christy are married to older men, and I am not. So, Gloria's husband was 20 years older than she. Steve is 17 years older or 16 than my sister Christina, although he is in good health. So, when the responsibility for my parents came about for helping to care for them, Gloria and Christy, who lived in Houston, were shouldering the majority of the load because my parents moved to Houston in, I think it was late 2011 or 2012. And at that time, they were both still fine, living independently. Uh, so, there wasn't much actual hands on care required. In 2017, as daddy's health began to decline, they went into assisted living in Houston. And again, my older sister, Gloria, and my younger sister, Christy, were carrying that load primarily. Daddy passed away in August of 2018. My mom had never lived alone in her life. She met my dad when she was 16 and he was 18. They
Mm.
dated 5 years and were married almost 67 years. And I am Cuban born. And, in the Cuban culture, you don't really go into assisted living. It's more of living with a child. But in this case, given my sister's responsibilities, it wasn't feasible. So after my dad died, my mother had asked, if I don't need assisted living, don't leave me here. She hated it. So we placed her in an independent living facility, and she was fine. She could still drive and everything else. but emotionally, she was going downhill fast. It was a completely different environment for her, living alone, not living with family, missing my father. So I moved her up here to Chicago with me. And thank God I did, because the pandemic struck just months afterwards. She
Mm.
lived alone or when I say alone, in an independent living facility from September 18 until pretty much September 19, when she moved to Chicago with me. And then the plan was she would live with me for 4 years. And after 4 years, she would go back to Houston and live with my older sister, Gloria. Her husband was very sick when my mom moved up here in 2019, and we knew he wasn't going to survive long. So the plan was, once Dick passed away, my brother-in-law Dick, my sister Gloria would have time to grieve, and then mom would go back to her 4 years, 4 years after she came here. December of 21, we're in Houston for Christmas, after not having seen anyone for a long time because of COVID. And we were scheduled to come back to Chicago in January of 22. About a day or two before we came back to Chicago, mom had a stroke.
Mm.
And after that, she remained in Houston because my sisters realized, given that her health had declined, it would be too much for me to take care of her here by myself. And in Houston, she did have both of my sisters and my brother-in-law, Steve, to whom my mom was very close. So the first year, she lived with Gloria in Gloria's home with 24/7 caregivers. And then at the end of 22, she had a second stroke. And that is when we transferred her to an assisted living facility. She didn't like the first one. She lasted there 8 or 9 months, and then we transferred her to a second one. In addition to that, my older sister, Gloria, thank God, has the means to have provided my mother with 24/7 care. So she had private caregivers in addition to living in an independent living or in an assisted living facility. And as you said earlier, there, unless your family has means, the cost of a lot of this is prohibitive.
Well, I mean that's where we're at. Is that, I mean, I've priced some of these in my own personal situation with some aging parents. Is that you do have a myriad of options. None of them are subsidized, right? So if you think about some of these assisted living homes, first of all, you're looking at statistics that it shortens a lifespan. It's very lonely. Look at what happened during COVID. But I hear you really working to between you and your sister to get her 24. I mean, the 24-hour care, I know how expensive that is because I've
Yeah,
priced it out.
I can tell
So
you it runs between the facility, and the prices vary among the facilities depending on how good they are and what kind of living space, if it's a 1 bedroom, if it's a 2 bedroom, if it's a studio. For my mom, the cost of the facility and private caregivers was running roughly anywhere between 23 and $25,000 a month.
so you split that with Gloria or
No,
Gloria or,
no. Gloria, well, my father had left my mother, uh, money, and she used that money for a number of years. And it was in the last year of her life. So in 26, in January of 26, Gloria took over that financial responsibility.
what do people not understand about that? Is that yes, of course, parents are going to do their best, you would think, in theory, to leave some type of a nest egg for independence when they get a little bit older. But when we spoke with Neil Shah, who will be included in this episode, people are simply living longer. We were not saying that they're living longer in a very healthy and robust manner. It's that we just have the ability to keep people alive. And you want to keep your loved ones alive, right?
Yes. Yeah, well, I think it's both. I think we do have the ability to keep people alive longer, but I think, over the years, nutrition has gotten better for a lot of people, exercise, things that maybe were not emphasized years ago like they are now. So I think it's a question of both. You know, we had the means to keep people alive longer. Plus, I think over the years, maybe even elderly people, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, got into healthier habits. So I think it's twofold.
You mentioned that you're Cuban American.
Yes.
We talked to Neil about this too. Every you know country is a little bit different, so I wouldn't, and I don't know the statistics. I have to look it up on assisted living in other countries.
Hmm.
But anecdotally, it's very common to have multi-generational homes in other countries. I wouldn't say it's as common here. Maybe people disagree with me. How much did your culture play a part in all this?
It was a consideration. Um, we left Cuba in 61. My mom, my dad, my three sisters, myself. And in 1962, my mother's parents came from Cuba. They lived with us. So it was a multi-generational home until roughly 1980, when my grandmother developed dementia, and they went into a Catholic assisted living home in Chicago run by nuns.
Mhm.
That was a very difficult decision for my mother because, again, there were no assisted living homes or nursing homes in Cuba when she was growing up. But it got to the point where, grandma was wandering out the door. So it was very difficult for her because it was a foreign concept, but it's a decision that had to be made. So when it came to my parents, given that we'd already had, and my mother had already had the experience of having to place her own parents in an assisted living facility, it wasn't as foreign or as difficult intellectually. I think it was still difficult for the three of us girls emotionally.
Oh, and tell me more why. And I also, I'm going to load this question.
Mhm.
Tell me about the emotional load, and then also coupled with the fact that you have to manage your own relationships, the relationship with your spouse, relationship with your children. Maybe your spouse doesn't want to be participating. Maybe your spouse doesn't want to participate financially. I mean, it could get very dicey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not married, so, and I don't have children, so I didn't have to contend with spouse and children. Um, when we made the initial decision to exercise assisted living as an option, both my parents were still alive. It was my mom and my dad. This is November 17. And my dad's health had declined to the point where, although we had had private caretakers in their home, my mother was the one who said, I can't handle all of these people in my house. I think it would be better if your father and I went to an assisted living facility. So my parents, selfless as they always were, made the decision easy for us because they didn't oppose it. And
Mhm.
they realized that my sister Gloria, having a husband 20 years her senior, he was closer in age to my parents, was in no position to have my parents come live with her. And my younger sister Christy and her husband Steve are both lawyers. We're both still working. They lived in a home, a 3-story home, and my parents couldn't do stairs. And I lived in Chicago by myself, and that was not an option.
Mhm.
So, as I said, they were very selfless in making the decision easy for us.
But even through all this, and it sounds like your family managed it and there was a lot of compromise and a lot of open discussions, to me, it just seems really heavy. It just seems like a sort of a heavy.
Well, I mean, it is. It's never easy, and it's never easy to make the decision to not take your parents into your own home, given that they made a home for you. But in our situation, as I said, it is one of those things that, as I said, selfless as they were, my parents suggested. So, as I said, and since they were together at that time, it was easier. It's once my father died and my mom was on her own that things got a lot more complicated.
What if you didn't have siblings? You know, we talked to Neil about this too, that people simply are not having kids as much as they used to. So this burden is falling on sometimes just one. And you had this open communication. So how would you envision this playing out if it was just you and you didn't have sisters, or if it was just you and Gloria, or maybe Gloria didn't have the financial support? Because you're talking about Houston and Chicago and assistant. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
lot to juggle.
I think what would have happened is we're Catholic, okay? When my family placed my grandparents in assisted living in 1980, my grandparents didn't have financial means. They came uh, to the United States when they were already in their late 60s. So they did not work. They had Medicaid, not Medicare. And I don't know about other religious assisted living facilities, but I do know this particular order of nuns the order is dedicated to caring for the elderly. And what you do is you sign over whatever monies you get from Medicare. And that is what we did. If I had been just me, if I didn't have siblings, I probably would have pursued that same kind of option. Although my father and my mom, had more financial means than my grandparents, but still not, enough to afford assisted living and 24/7 care, for years on end. So
Are,
if that situation would have been left to me and me alone, I would have pursued the same kind of religious assisted living facility where the cost isn't prohibitive.
but are the resources plentiful for people in your situation? I mean, it sounded like you always did have this support system. Very respectfully to my two brothers, you have three women who are taking the helm. We could have another podcast about that, right? I'm gonna get a little judgy
If
here.
you're asking if between my parents and I, we could have afforded an assisted living facility where you're paying $7,000 a month plus private care at $16,000 a month. Is that your question?
Yeah.
The answer is no. The answer is no. So that's why I said, had it been me alone, I would have had to pursue the same kind of options my parents did for my mother's parents.
The reason I ask that question is because we have a surge of people who are in their 80s and 90s, and they're going to be living for the next 10 years. And we simply have a huge gap in population. So between 18 and 35 is significantly smaller than those are in that generation. So we are approaching sort of an SOS, a period of time where we're going to have a whole generation who needs caregiving. And
Yeah.
so your situation will become normal. And I'm just wondering, is the infrastructure there, the support there, the funds there, and the policy there?
To the best of my knowledge, no. No. What I've seen, the situations that I've seen, and this issue of caring for an elderly parent is a situation that a lot of my friends are facing right now. Uh, I'm in my 60s, and I have a good number of friends my age, some a little younger, that are tasked with the responsibility of caring for their parents. Some, strictly emotionally, not necessarily financially. The majority of them, a combination of both. And really, the situation is either you have the means or they have the means, okay, where they can afford assisted living and private care, or if they don't go to assisted living, they own their own home and the care is brought in at home, or they're going to some subpar place,
Mhm.
or if it's a family without means, but there are, multiple children, you move the parent in and the siblings take turns. Or I have situations where uh, the individual is retired and taking care of the parent at home.
Mhm. What conversations do you hear with your friends? Is it, it's what are they talking about? What are you guys venting to each other about?
The fine line between not stripping your parent of all autonomy and decision making over their own life, yet sometimes having to override them, because although they may not have dementia in the classic sense, they still know who they are, they know how old they are, they know who the president is, they know the date, month, and year. There is a loss of executive function, and they lack the ability to correctly perceive how truly independent or not independent they are. And sometimes they have an unrealistic version uh, of what their physical and intellectual capabilities are.
Right.
And in some ways, not in some ways, I think in every way, it's easier when you're the parent to a young child. You are the authority figure when you're the parent to a young child. It's my way or the highway. Okay. With an elderly parent, that's not so easy to effectuate. The roles change in that often you, in reality, become the parent and they become the child.
Mhm.
Yet, when you're telling your elderly parent, no, you are, I am not taking you to whatever event it is today because that's going to tire you out, requiring a lot of physical mobility that you no longer have. And they argue with you, well, I'm going regardless. And sometimes you just have to say, and it's very hard, okay, I'm not your warden. You do what you want to do, but don't count on my help for this endeavor.
Right.
So that is a topic, that balancing act between still allowing them autonomy over their own lives so they don't feel like they don't have a choice, yet trying to guide them into what you think is realistically best for them. And that is often uh, that's often a battleground.
Well, you're walking a tightrope too, because you can't, especially in my situation, you just can't let that person drive for the safety of others and for the safety
Oh,
of the
yeah.
house.
That's, I mean, mom was very easy in that regard. My mother was, I know I'm really not capable of driving anymore. Here are my keys. We had to wrestle my dad down. And thank God my younger sister was very active in that. She was very good with daddy. It was really towards the last year and a half or so that the responsibility of mom, not the financial responsibility, but the emotional responsibility fell to me because both my sisters developed serious health issues and weren't really actively able to participate in overseeing mom's care. So I was flying back and forth to Houston constantly. That was hard.
What would you say, advice? What would you tell women, I mean men too, who are just starting this journey? Because it could last 3 years, it could last 10 years. And it sounds like even in best case scenario, which in theory you had the resources and sisters, it's still really traumatic.
It is emotionally draining. Any way you look at it, it is emotionally draining. And I mean, a part of it depends on how easy your parent is. Okay. Overall, my dad was very easy. Mom was not. Uh, And sometimes I would say, number one, be prepared for the possibility of a personality change in old age. My mom was one of the sweetest, easygoing women you would ever hope to meet. And in her old age, and it's hard for me to say this, but it's true, she became somewhat of a battle axe. She emotionally exhausted my sisters and myself. And I know that she did not mean to, she would never do that. But that's what I mean by a loss of executive function. Uh, we fired 15 caregivers before we found a team of caregivers that somewhat met her expectations. Okay. So, A, be prepared for personality change, fortify yourself. B, pick and choose your battles. I mean, sometimes you just have to throw yourself, throw your hands up in the air and say, okay, learn that you don't always have to be right. If they say 2 + 2 = 5, sometimes it's supposed to say, no, mom, it's 4, but let it go. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, you are not going to have the stamina to run the race, particularly if it's a long one. So there are no regrets once they're gone. Try to be as patient and as loving as possible, because then otherwise the guilt sets in.
Oh, yeah.
Don't be afraid to talk to your friends about it. It helps. I know that emotionally, I could not have gone through a lot of this alone if I did not have the support of my friends and of the man that was my boyfriend at the time. His mom is 98 years and 4 months next month. He has a slew of siblings, but for a long period of time, he was her really primary caretaker from Sunday afternoons to Thursday afternoons. Mm. And it was difficult, but at least I had someone to talk to who was going through the same thing, who understood the anxieties, the frustrations. And if you're going to stay sane, you've got to have like a point person who understands what you're going through, because it is difficult intellectually, and at time because you're called upon to make decisions all the time. You know, medical care, this, that, they're not eating, they're refusing treatment. I mean, there's a lot of balls in the air. So you need someone there to support you intellectually, and there can be some real soul wrenching moments emotionally. So make sure you have your own support system, because sometimes they say, you know, the caregiver really doesn't care for themselves. You've got to, it's like the old, you know, before you can help someone on a plane, you've got to put on your own oxygen mask.
Oh, yeah.
Mindful of that.
That's a conversation in our household a lot, is that we have a situation where a spouse is a primary caregiver. And we always say, you know, don't lose yourself, you know, go to tennis and go to dinner with your friends. And it does start to wear on everyone involved.
Yeah.
Maria.
Consume your life, and you can feel at times that you're living your elderly parents' life as opposed to living your own. It can be that all consuming, because in mom's case, it just felt like there was an issue every other day. So it can be very hard.
So I think I'm going to end on probably the most loaded question is, you're still grieving. You'll be grieving until the day that you pass, right? These are our parents. These are the people who.
Yes.
What is the then emotional roller coaster when they passed. And again, this is fresh for you. We're talking November, but it's also important that we have this part of the conversation and we end on it.
I will try and hold it together.
Right. I know. I threw this one at you.
Extremely emotional for me. There isn't a day I don't miss my mother. However, I would be lying if I said I did not feel a tremendous sense of relief. If the responsibility for caring for an elderly parent falls on you in whole or in part, I think it is impossible not to feel like you're carrying bricks of varying weights on your shoulders, depending on how much of the responsibility you're carrying. When mom died, I felt a relief for her and that she was no longer suffering because her quality of life had really diminished in the last year. Because I'm Catholic, I believe in an afterlife. I was happy that she was going to be reunited, with God, with my dad, with my sisters, with her parents, and everybody who had passed before her. And I was relieved for myself that this was no longer going to be the first thought I had every day. What's going to happen today? What phone call am I going to get? Every night, you sleep with the phone right by your bed. You never turn it off because you could get that phone call. Is it okay to take her to the hospital? Her oxygen levels have dropped, whatever it could be dramatically. And so there is no guilt. I always say, walk with them as far in this life if you can, if the opportunity permits. And I've done this twice, both when my sister died, and she died 2 weeks shy of her 50th birthday. So she was 49 years old. This was 2004. And when my mom died, when the funeral home came to take her, I said, please, don't put her in a body bag. Just transfer her on a stretcher, cover her like if she's asleep. And I had the opportunity to walk both and my mother and my sister to the van, that would take them to the funeral home, and it gave me great comfort, and still does, both in my sister's situation and my mom's, knowing that figuratively and literally, I walked with them as far in this life as I could. So that's something that worked for me. And whatever way you do that, I guess what I'm saying is do everything you need to do while you have them so you don't feel the guilt when they're gone. Because I have some friends who, with the passing of the parent, are dealing with terrible guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And that is on top of the grief. If you've got guilt and grief, that is one bad situation. And I didn't want that for myself. So I was mindful of that, you know, while both my parents were still alive.
Well, I think it's beautiful too. It's beautiful you've been so open, and like you said, you're strong in your faith, but whoever or whatever your creator may be, it's find that peace almost before the end is what I'm hearing, and I think that's phenomenal for us.
As it is you, if you don't find that peace before you lose your parent, you are going to be paying a very heavy emotional price. And the combination of guilt and grief can be paralyzing. And you don't want that.
Yeah, especially after what you've gone through caregiving. Maria, I couldn't be more grateful for you. I think your vulnerability was so beautiful. It's one of those episodes where you're thinking to yourself, life can be so beautiful and then also so dark at times, right? And
Oh,
you walk you walk it.
Yeah, I mean, I always think of one of my favorite quotes in the world is Queen Elizabeth said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." And it couldn't be true.
It's true. Well, thank you, Maria. I'm so grateful for you. I really am.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad to help because, as I said, this is a topic and a situation that's going to befall a lot of us if we're lucky for our parents to live into old age.
Yeah. Thank you again.
You're welcome.